coming. I'm extremely nervous. I've never done a panel like this before, but I think it'll be a lot of fun. Maybe it'll be a disaster in the making, but we will see how it goes. My name is Salvato. I am probably best known for making a psychological horror game called Doki Doki Literature Club. And I finally get to do a panel where people are like, oh, what's that? And I'm just like, it doesn't matter. You know, we get to do something cool today. I've been and I'm just gonna start playing this like while I'm talking, but I've been a retro game enthusiast for basically my whole life, you know, since I was like in middle school. I wanted to get like an NES and all that. I just always loved retro games. And now I'm like 30 years old and freaking Half-Life 2 is a retro game. It's just like not very comfortable, but you know, today we're talking more about what we colloquially refer to as retro, which is like kind of the 8 and 16-bit consoles. You know, and just for fun, I'm interested in hearing some enthusiasm for maybe some of our favorite retro consoles. So you know, you feel free to give a little cheer if I name your console. I want to gauge the room and you know, see what consoles people like. So yeah, let's start with NES. Who would say their favorite console? Obviously a classic. Yeah, no, let's stick with Nintendo. How about Super Nintendo? Who's a anyone for Sega Genesis? Alright. That one has my favorite CPU, the Motorola 68000. Alright, how about, let's see, how about Commodore 64? Anybody? Yeah. Alright, let's go. Then speaking of Commodore, how about Amiga? Any Amiga fans in here? Okay, thank you for the pity claps. Yeah, Amiga's my own favorite system, and the game that I'm playing right now is actually an Amiga game that I've been working on for the past year or so. Well, let's keep the ball rolling. Who likes Nintendo 64? PlayStation 1, anybody? Yeah, I love those wobbly polygons that PS1's famous for. It's very classy. In fact, there are like modern indie games who they're like emulating that wobbly polygon look, and it's just really cool. Yeah, let's try handhelds for a second. How about Game Boy Color? Game Boy Color? And finally, how about Game Boy Advance? That one might have been the most enthusiastic. I just threw that in there because my buddy in the front row here is a Game Boy Advance fan. But yeah, that's awesome. All right. Let's get a little more obscure. Who likes the ZX Spectrum? Anybody? Okay, I heard one person. All right, one person clap. Awesome. Oh, let's see what else. How about the Party 2600? Anyone just a stand at the console? All right, let's go. Yeah, now we're getting like super old school. All right. Let's see. Here's a wild card. How about Vectrex? Anyone a Vectrex fan? No. All right. That console is super dang cool though. Just saying. Yeah, but if you wander around the expo halls as much as I did, you probably noticed that like so many of the indie games have this sort of pixel art aesthetic that was really inspired by, you know, especially Super Nintendo. So many indie games just sort of go for that 16-bit aesthetic. Sometimes 8-bit as well. There are a lot of famous indie games that go for the 8-bit aesthetic, kind of emulating the NES look. But that is not exactly why we're here today. We are here today to look at making games for real for these retro consoles. We love emulating the look. Clearly we have a fondness for these consoles. But we don't just have to emulate them. We can literally make games for them. And it's not some kind of black magic. Like, it's like gray magic at worst. But we can do it, and we actually have better tools than ever to do so. I would say that today is easier and more accessible to make games for retro consoles than it ever has been, and it just keeps getting better. We have a lot of fast modern tools like Visual Studio Code. We have emulators. We have great software for making art and music. The software that developers are using to make pixel art for their modern retro style games you can use that same software and make real art for your retro consoles. For example, what you see here is mostly just PNGs and Photoshop and pixel art software. We have basically an infinite well of knowledge thanks to the internet. We have tutorials everywhere, video tutorials. You could basically just search YouTube for how to make games for NES and Commodore 64. You have all these tutorials. People are sharing source code. We are also, naturally, we're better game designers than we were 30 years ago. We have learned from decades of mistakes. We are in a spot where we're no longer pushing it has to be the most colorful, highest quality, highest resolution graphics. They cared about that so much back in the 80s, especially when 16-bit started to roll out. They were like, oh, we have to make these games look like arcade games, we have to have these giant sprites. And a lot of publishers kind of prioritize that over just making a really good game that's fun to play. But we have moved away from that, and now we have an appreciation for the simplicity in art. We have two-color games out there. Let's see, Downwell, Gato Roboto, a couple of those, one or two color games. They look beautiful and they play incredibly well. We have an appreciation for that, so we can go back and make games for these consoles that feel like modern games. And then the last thing is we don't have deadlines anymore because we're probably just doing this as a hobby, so we can take as long as we want. Back then, publishers were trying to push these games out the door in 6 months from start to finish. We don't have to deal with that. We can take our time, have incredible attention to detail, and breathe new life into these old consoles that just would not have been possible 30 years ago. We can make them do things that have never been seen before. And that's something that I think is just really incredible, being able to allow our favorite consoles to just live on and do new things, have incredible modern game experiences on them. And with that, I also want to say that I haven't been doing this my whole life. I've been doing it for maybe a year, 2 years at most. So I'm not the most extremely qualified. There might even be people in the audience here who are more qualified to be giving this talk than I am. But since sort of the getting into it is kind of fresh in my mind, and I have that experience with learning about these tools and going through the tutorials and just my mind being blown with this community, I feel like I'm in a good spot to share that passion and pass it on to you. So we're just going to see how that goes. But before that, I want to answer the question of why, aside from the obvious things that I said, why would you as an aspiring game developer, or maybe even running an indie dev studio, why would you want to make a game for a retro console? When there's probably a whole bunch of new hurdles, it seems like a really niche sort of thing. It's not like something that everybody's into. But in my opinion, limiting your demographic a little bit to a more niche community can actually be a recipe for success. It is a much more intimate community. You have people who are really enthusiastic to consume new content in this space. And if you are as passionate and enthusiastic as they are, then you can really connect with them, and it feels very personal. There's a closeness, and I think that can actually translate to more visibility than just throwing your game into the wider gaming space where you're competing in this very oversaturated pool. I feel very strongly about that. Aside from that, I think it is an amazing learning experience because nowadays our game developer tools, software development in general, is so abstracted at a high level. You feel so separated from what the machine is actually doing, and I think that's part of the beauty of these old consoles is it feels like you're talking directly to the machine. Nowadays, it's like you write a piece of code, and that code might be lowered, and then it has to be compiled, or maybe you run a virtual machine, and then it talks to the graphics library, and the graphics library talks to the operating system. The operating system talks to the BIOS, and it's just like layers upon layers upon layers, and you're so removed. And it's really convenient to make games on these modern platforms, but there is also something that feels really good about just talking directly to the computer. And the final reason is that limitations can breed creativity. That's something that we see a lot. If you are if you're given a limited piece of hardware that can only do so much per frame, or it only has a limited number of colors, limited number of sprites, I think that you can come up with incredible focused game ideas that are really fun. Simple games are still really fun. They never stopped being fun. They were fun back in the 80s, they're still fun. And oftentimes you can come up with just a very simple idea, execute it really well, and have a big hit that's a huge amount of fun to play. I think that's still very much on the table, and developing for retro games can encourage that. There was also, on the flip side, there was a why not as well. You know, I'm sure you're all here because you're interested in the why personally, but there's also a why not, and that is, it's slower than modern game development because there's a lot more that you have to do manually. It's a little more challenging. There's more problems that you have to solve along the way. A lot of things that, you know, modern developer tools or frameworks take care of for you, you have to do more manually. And the other thing is that modern game development, it lets us focus more of our time and effort on the game design. We get to think more about how we want it to play, iterate on how it feels. That is a much faster process, whereas if you're developing for a retro system, then every single small individual feature, you probably have to spend a good amount of time getting it to work in the first place. And so that sort of rapid iteration and rapid prototyping is a little bit more difficult in this space. You could, and some people do this, they actually make a prototype on a modern platform, and then later on they sort of port it to the retro platform, and that's totally viable as well. But yeah, just something to consider when you're developing for this. It's, you know, it can be a little bit slower. You're probably going to be spending more time just getting the simpler features to work. And for some people, that's not as fun because they want to get right to the fun stuff, which is the game design. For other people, that's a ton of fun because they love the challenge, they love that problem solving, and doing everything manually. That's can be a reward in itself. Yeah, but with that, I think that's probably end of talk. Well, let's see how I did here. I got hit 19 times. That kind of makes sense because I was talking while I was playing. As I mentioned, yeah, the artwork here, it looks like it could be a modern indie game. This is running on Amiga, which is a system that came out in 1985. Although I'm not here to just plug my own game, I just wanted to use it as an example. We are here to do some coding. We are not just going to be talking the whole time. I am going to, let me switch screens over here. We are going to be coding a game for Commodore 64 right here on stage in assembly language. And you have to sit through the whole thing with me. And we're just going to see how it is. And I've prepared something that I'm going to do my best, even if you have like little to no coding experience, you should be able to understand what's going on. At the very least, I'm going to do my best. Like I said, it's assembly language, but I think I've made something that should be accessible and understandable for everybody. This is Commodore 64. This is what it looks like when you first turn it on. All you get is the ready and the prompt. You can type stuff in. You can code. Here's the famous, 10 print 20, go to 10, and you can run your program. And there it goes. We're just infinitely printing PAX over and over. This is what you got when you turn on your computer. You just type and you start coding. I mean, you could load software as well, but it was pretty neat because you could get like magazines that have what they call like type-in programs where it's just printed in a magazine, you type it in letter by letter, and then you hit run and you get to see your computer, your fancy computer do like some cool thing, and you're like, wow, technology. I think a lot of people who lived through that, myself not included, I'm just parroting what they have said, sort of miss that accessibility of kind of learning like how to code a computer and use a computer in that way because, again, we don't have that sort of difficulty in using a computer anymore. A lot more is done for us. Another interesting thing about old computers is that there is no memory protection or any. You could do anything to any part of the system memory that you want. I can poke the computer. I'm talking to address 53280, which famously in Commodore 64 is the video chip uses that address to control the border color. And I can just send out a signal, type this in, and then we talk to our friend Vic, who was the video chip on the Commodore 64. We say, here, take this number, put it in this address, and Vic is like, okay, and then Vic takes it and puts it in, and uses that number to look up some voltages and sends out those voltages to your television screen and it makes a new color. We could just do literally anything. I mean, we can type in something that just crashes the machine and makes it unusable. It's all open for us to do whatever we want. And I think that's really exciting. We are talking directly to the computer. There's no abstraction. We can just do whatever we want. And we're going to do that. So I'm going to put the simulator here for a second, and we are now in Visual Studio Code. Currently the most ubiquitous code editor, very modern. There are so many extensions for VS Code that allow you to develop for retro systems. It is so seamless. They have so many amazing features. They have debugging. It's so easy to do nowadays, and I'm really excited to demonstrate that for you. We just have basically a blank project here. There was some startup code that I'm not really going to go through. It's just very standard. It's going to run a setup routine when the computer first turns on, and then once per frame, every frame, there's going to be like a main loop that happens, and so that's where most of our game is going to go. RTS basically just means we're done. It's going to return execution back to whatever called it. It basically just means that we're done with this section. So we're going to go ahead and run this real quick. And we just get nothing. My setup code basically just clears the screen and then turns off the operating system, and then we have nothing going on. But let's give the CPU some instructions. Let's make the system do something. If you're not a software developer, you might just be wondering how computers work in general. Like, what's the CPU do? What's the memory do? All of that. Very simple. We have the CPU, which is our arithmetic machine. We grab numbers from memory, we do arithmetic on them in our hands, and then we give them back to memory. And sometimes we give them to our friend Vic, the video chip, and then it draws stuff on the screen. That's it. That's pretty much the way that a computer works at the barest level. You do arithmetic, and then you give those numbers back to memory. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So during our setup routine, let's load a color. We're gonna change the border color again, the background color. So we're gonna load. Let's see. We're gonna load light blue, and we're gonna store it into address D020. Light blue is just this program conveniently names a color for me. It's actually decimal number 14, which you can see when you put your mouse over it. So all we're doing is we're loading number 4. We're taking the number 14, putting it in our hands, or the accumulator register. We're taking that number, and then we're storing it to a piece of memory on the computer, or in this case, we're sending it over to our friend Vic, who's going to use it to set the border color. If we put our mouse over this, you can see it says decimal 53280. That was the same number that I was putting in the Commodore 64 earlier. Hexadecimal is just a more convenient binary-esque way of representing decimal numbers. And when you see this dollar sign, that means it's going to be a hexadecimal number. I could also put, if I wanted, I could put that there. It's the same thing. But typically, when you're working with software development, especially for old systems, you're going to be using hexadecimal or even binary for these numbers. So aside from that, let's load white. Grab a white, taking it into our hands again, and then we're going to store that into D021, which is Vic's address for the background color. These numbers, they seem like just random numbers that I just happen to magically know in my big brain or whatever, but you can just look this stuff up. You look up Commodore 64 hardware registers or NES hardware registers, and you get some wiki that has them all listed out, and they tell you exactly what they all do. So it's really not that complicated. We're just going to see every now and then. I'm going to be typing in these random numbers and we get them. And look at that. So we have a light blue border and we have a white background. So in literally just a few instructions, we're already doing interesting stuff with this machine. We're just talking to the CPU directly, saying, take this number, give it to Vic, and then we get stuff on the screen. It's very immediate and gratifying. But let's put some graphics on the screen too. We don't want to just change the colors. So we're going to put a sprite on the screen. And another thing that you might be wondering is, what is a sprite anyway? It's something that we always hear, and we mention the character sprite, and it's just kind of a graphic. A sprite is for real, where the term came from is these old computers. These old computers, they're not fast enough to redraw the entire screen every single frame. It actually, like putting pixel by pixel, you need a lot of bandwidth to push all that data through. And so a sprite was a special feature of the video chip, in this case our friend Vic, where you give it like an address to a graphic that you already have sitting in memory. Like in here you can see in my graphics file, I just have this array of ones and zeros. This is actually, I'm like drawing a graphic here. And then I have this label called player sprite, and all we have to do is we have to give that label player sprite to our friend Vic, and then tell it to draw sprite, and then Vic pretty much handles the rest. It has that. Now we give it the positions, and then when the raster beam is going across the screen and drawing the screen, Vic kicks in and is like, oh, we hit this position, I gotta start plotting the points for this sprite. And that allows us to actually just give Vic new position coordinates and move the sprite around the screen without having to redraw pixel by pixel every frame. So let's see if we can go ahead and start loading that in. Again, I'm just going to put in a couple of magical addresses here that tell Vic to control the sprites. First thing is we are going to load our player sprite, and we're going to store it into this magical address. And of course, with Commodore 64, we have to divide this number by 64. Because this is an 8-bit machine. Our player sprite label you can see on here is 2000. This is a 16-bit number, and so Commodore 64, in order to handle like condense that into 8 bits, you just divide it by 64, and that's just the way that the video chip works. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and now we need to set the sprite color. So we're going to load dark gray, and we're going to store it to this other magical address. And now we're going to set the position. Let's just set like position 100 for X and Y. It's just, to test, put our graphic on the screen. And we're going to store it in these two addresses, which are the X and Y positions for sprite 0. And then the last thing that we need to do is we need to enable the sprite. Commodore 64 has 8 sprites, and you can enable and disable them depending on which one you're using. So we're going to go ahead and load that address in. So this one is going to be in binary, the percent. So we've been using the $ sign for hexadecimal, now we're using the percent sign for binary. And like I said, 8 sprites, it has 8 bits. So all zeros except for the last one is a 1. That just says to enable the first sprite. We can enable all 8 sprites by making these all 1s. We can enable the first 2 sprites by making these 1s. It's just 1 bit per sprite. And then we're going to go ahead and store that into, where are we? Into 2015. Which is the sprite enable hardware register for bit. So that's pretty much it so far. I commented this wrong. This should be set sprite graphic. Setting the sprite graphic, we're setting the color, setting the position, and then we're enabling the sprite. And we're doing this in just a few lines of code. All we're doing is, again, just loading a number, putting it in our hands, and then giving it to Vic, and Vic's special hardware registers, and then letting it do the magic. So let's run this and see what happens. There he is, and it's our friend, the Google Chrome dinosaur. And, we might have to quit pretty quickly here, but we're gonna try making the Google Chrome no internet dinosaur game. not the whole thing, but just like a very basic, much worse version of it. But before that, let's do some more tests. Let's see if we can move this sprite. What do you think we have to do just in order to move this sprite? It's not as hard as you think. But before that, I don't want to keep, like I said, these are for the sprite X and Y positions here, the D0 and D001. I don't want to keep writing those over and over. There has to be an easier way to represent these and remember what they are. And there is. As you can see, you're able to name numbers. You saw this with the colors, like the light blue and the white and the gray. We can give our own names to numbers as well. And so we're going to go ahead and do that up here. We're just going to say the sprite of the player X is this number, and then sprite player Y is this number. Okay, so now we've given these numbers a name, sprite player X and sprite player Y. So now we can actually go down here and instead of using those numbers, we can use the names that we gave them. And this makes our code so much more readable, especially when you're just scrolling through. Now you can actually see we're loading 100, and then we're storing it in sprite player X and sprite player Y. And if we're lucky, we should be able to run this and we get the exact same thing. Dinosaurs in the exact same position. So this is a feature that we're going to be using quite a bit to just make our code a lot more readable. Okay, so let's enter the main loop. Let's start moving this dinosaur down the screen. He needs some gravity because he's going to be jumping. So let's in the main loop. Let's just increment sprite player Y. Increment just it adds 1 to the number. In this case, what's the best way to put it? So when you're talking to the computer's memory, when you need to manipulate values in the computer's memory, you can almost think of it like you're in a mailroom, and you have a bunch of mailboxes that are numbered, and those are kind of like addresses. And each mailbox has a value inside of it. It has a piece of paper with a number written on it. The number can be from 0 to 255. It's an 8-bit machine. And so there is a mailbox with this address, U000, and it has a number in it. Earlier we put number 100 in it, and now we're just incrementing that. We're just adding 1 to it every frame of the main loop. So we'll run that. And look, there he goes. He's going. Okay, goodbye. Oh, he's back. So, again, this is an 8-bit machine. A single 8-bit number can only be from 0 to 255. So once it goes down and reaches Y position 255, and we add 1 to it, it can't go to 256. It actually loops back around to 0. And so that's why he just keeps on going up and down. And you know, if you played old games and there's like sprite wrapping issues, that's why that happens basically. So just like that, one single instruction, and we already have a sprite moving on the screen. It's pretty easy. In just a few minutes, we can have something moving on the screen. But let's keep going here. Let's give them some gravity and a little bit more modern physics. We need to add some subpixels. And that might, once again, have been a term that you heard when talking about retro games. Oh, there's the subpixels. Why do you need those? Like, just move by pixels. Well, as you can see, he's moving 1 pixel per frame right now. And he's going pretty fast. We might need to move slower than that, this is about a quarter of the screen every second. So if that's 1 pixel per frame, then you can do 2 pixels per frame, which is double the speed, and there's just not enough precision for us to have like real physics or gravity here. We need to make some subpixels, and for that we need to, instead of just talking to the sprite X and Y positions, we need to have our own position values in memory. We're going to start, actually leveraging real memory now instead of just talking to our friend Vic. So we're going to name some more numbers here, and I'll explain these in a second. Okay, so these are going to be the position of our dinosaur friend. You can see that there is low and high for the position and low and high for the velocity. And that is just a naming convention. We can basically say the high position is the pixel and the low position is the subpixel. So what we're doing down here, storing our value 100 to the sprite, we are instead going to store that to our new position address, and then later on we will give that value to the sprite. But before that, we need to make sure that, let's see. So again, I just picked these random numbers for memory addresses. Again, we're in the mail room, and you have mailboxes, number 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they have numbers in them. They could be anything. And we're just, right now they're basically empty mailboxes, and we're going to start using them to store numbers in them. Because we can only hold 1 number in our hands at a time, but we need to track more stuff like the position, the velocity, and so we're going to keep those in the mailboxes. So just to make sure that they're empty, we need to zero them out. So we're going to take the number 0 in our hands, and we're going to store it into each of these mailboxes. Okay, and then I'll add another comment here, set background colors. So far, these do nothing. They're just empty mailboxes that don't do anything. But we can make them do something. So we can, in our loop here, let's increment the position instead. And now, so we've incremented the position. Again, it's just this arbitrary mailbox that doesn't do anything. But what we can do is, at the end of our loop, we can grab that number from the mailbox, and we can give it to Vic, our friend Vic, who controls the sprites and the graphics and all that. So we just added, we're pretty much doing the same thing. Before we were incrementing the sprite directly. Now we are just incrementing some arbitrary mailbox, and then after that we're taking that number from the mailbox and giving it to Vic. So this should also do the same thing. There he goes. Okay, well let's see if we can add some gravity now. I'm gonna again name another number. Just call it grav, and let's make it like 10 for instance. Just some arbitrary number. And now we need a physics routine. So let's go down. We're gonna make a new label here called physics, and let's add gravity to velocity. This is pretty much, the way physics works is you have position, you have velocity, you have acceleration, and the way they work together is you add acceleration to velocity, you add velocity to position, and that's how physics works. And we do the same thing in games, and so that's what we're going to be doing here. I will explain this instruction in a second. That stands for clear the carry bit. But all we have to do is, so again, we have our numbers named up here. We have velocity low, velocity high, position low, position high. So the first step is we want to add gravity to the velocity. So what we're going to do is we're going to reach into our velocity low mailbox, grab the number, and then we're going to add gravity to it. And then we're going to store it back. Very simple. Once again, grabbing the mailbox, or grabbing the value from the velocity mailbox, adding gravity to it, adding 10 to it, and then putting it back in the mailbox. That's all we're doing here. Now we have to do the same thing. So this is the low value, the subpixel value. Now we have to do the same thing with the high value, the pixel value. We're going to do something a little bit different here. We're going to be adding 0 to it. And that's kind of strange. So what's it going to do if we take from the mailbox and we add 0 to it and then put it back? It shouldn't do anything. But this is kind of a quirk of 8-bit machines. You have like a pixel and a subpixel, and it's like, how do you, the subpixel is like a fraction, so if you add a bunch to it and, the fraction carries over to the main number, how do you do more than just 8-bit addition working from 0 to 255? And on 8-bit machines, you have this carry value, so that when I'm adding gravity to the subpixel or the fraction, what's the best way to put it? If it overflows, if the fraction overflows, again, it can be 0 to 255. Let's say the velocity is like 250 and we add 10 to it. So now it's 260. But it can't be that. It has to overflow back to 0 and then it's actually 5. When that overflow happens, it sets a special flag called the carry flag, telling us that some overflow has happened. And then what we can do is we can take that carry, again, just like normal math that we would do on pen and paper, we can take that carry and add it to the larger number. We're just carrying it right over. And that's why we're adding 0 here, because add is actually, ABC is added with the carry. So it remembers that carry from up here, our fractional value. And so we go down here, when we add 0, well, if the carry flag is set, then it's actually going to add 1. Similar to, again, pen and paper math, you can imagine like you have a little carry number at the top, even if it's 0, then you have that carry. It's pretty much the same thing here. Again, my first time doing this, I hope that was clear enough on the way that works. We're just carrying the fractional value over to the main value. Moving on, so we added the gravity to the velocity, so now let's add the velocity to position. Again, oh, that's right, CLC, that stands for clear the carry flag. again, if you're doing addition on multiple different numbers, you don't want the carry flag to like stick around when you're doing some other kind of addition. We want to get rid of that because we're starting a whole new mathematical expression or whatever. We want to make sure that we don't accidentally bring that over. So we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to take the position, and we're going to add the velocity to it, and then we're going to store it back. Pretty much the exact same thing as up there. Okay, and that's our physics. Again, acceleration gets added to velocity, velocity gets added to position, and you have physics. So now we're done. And we learned earlier, when we're done, RTS, return to sender. So now we have this physics routine. All we have to do is go up to our main loop here, and before we were just like, incrementing the position one time every frame. Well, now instead of doing that, we want to run our new physics routine. And we can do that really, really easily. All you do is type JSR, jump to subroutine, physics. And what this does is, it pretty much says it's going to run this routine down here, and then when the routine is done, we jump back to this position. So this allows us to, just like in modern code, we have functions. We can kind of segment our little pieces of logic and have our own modular routines, and then easily, put them in a nice readable form like this. So again, this is really, if we're looking at an overview of our code, this is all we need to concern ourselves with. We have the main loop. Now we're doing the physics. And then at the very bottom, let's just add a comment here. Right position is right. Yeah, we're just taking our position right into this right. Let's see if our physics routine works. If it works, we should have some gravity and acceleration and velocity. Let's see what happens. Oh, there he goes. Oh, he's going faster. Oh, there he goes. This reminds me of Portal, doesn't it? Yeah. And he's just going to keep going faster and faster and faster until, again, the acceleration will cap at 255, and then go back around to 0, and then he'll not be moving anymore. So, obviously, this is not good enough for a dinosaur game. We actually need to stop moving when it hits the ground, so that's what we're going to do next. We're going to call that the clamp routine, because his position gets clamped when he hits the ground. We want to make sure he doesn't go through the floor. So again, we're going to name a new number up here. The max position, it's just going to be 228. That's something I looked up ahead of time. It's like the coordinate basically for the bottom of the screen. And we just want to make sure that if his position is higher than that number, the position max, then we don't want him to go higher than that. So we're going to look and see if it's higher. We're just going to set him back to that maximum position so he hits the floor instead of goes through the floor. This is pretty easy to do. All you have to do is, so we have our position mailbox, position high. All you have to do is we take this number and we compare it to max position. And if it's greater than the max position, then we just set it to the max position instead of letting it be greater. It's pretty similar to modern programming languages, except instead of if statements, there's something that is a little bit more complicated. I'm not going to go into all the details of it here. But we're going to use the compare, taking the position, comparing it to the max position, and if it is not greater than the max position, then we don't care, we don't want to do anything. So if it's up here, if the dinosaur's up here somewhere, we don't want to do any clamping, this routine doesn't matter. It's only if it reaches the ground and goes below the ground, that's when we need to clamp it back to the ground and make sure it doesn't keep going. So I'm going to write this. Actually, let's just make this an E to make it more readable. So this pretty much is, this stands for branch if the carry is clear. Again, I'm not going to get too much into the way that the branching works, but this basically, when numbers are compared, it does a subtraction and it sets that same carry flag that I was talking about earlier. But this basically means we're comparing, and if our position is less than the max position, then it's going to just go to the end here. And I'm going to make a label here to return. So basically, here's the comparison. yeah, if our value is less than, then we are just going straight to this label, which is called E, and then we're gonna leave. But if there is, if it's greater than, then we've gone through the floor, then the rest of this routine runs. And all we have to do is load our max position and store it in our position mailbox. So once again, if we have gone through the floor, if our position is greater than the max position, all we're doing is taking that max position number, storing it to our position, and it keeps us on the floor. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to take 0 and all the other positions and velocities. We don't want the velocity to keep going. If he's on the floor, your velocity stops. And so we're just going to set all that to 0. So position low, which is our subpixel, velocity, we're going to store all that to 0. And that's it. So that is our clamp routine. Now all we have to do is, again, go back into the main loop, run clamp after the physics, and we'll see if that works. Okay, here he comes. There we go, now he hits the floor. Excellent. Okay, what's next? How about we make him jump? That sounds like it'll be fun. Yeah, and just looking at the time, because I probably do want to have some time for questions at the end. We're probably not going to get through this whole thing. We'll see how we're doing after jumping. So let's see. How do we want to jump? Well, there's a joystick plugged into our fake Commodore 64 here, and whenever we hit the fire button on the joystick, we want it to jump. So we need a way to check to see if the fire button is pressed, and if it is, then we just give him some upward velocity. We already have the gravity in there and everything, so we just launch him upwards when we hit the fire button, and that's basically like a jump. So that should be pretty easy to do too. Again, everything that I'm doing so far, these physics and drawing something on the screen, like look at how few lines of code this is. You figure like assembly always seems like some overly complicated thing where you have to write 200 lines of code to do the simplest stuff, but this is pretty simple. We're loading numbers, we're storing them, we're doing some basic arithmetic, and we're drawing stuff on the screen like right away. It's I think it's a lot less intimidating than a lot of people make it out to be. And if you don't understand absolutely everything that's going on, you should still be able to understand just the general flow of things. Again, taking numbers and then doing that math on them. Okay, so what do we need? We need to talk to the joystick. We're going to talk to joystick number 2, and that is this address. Is that our friend Vic? Because it starts with a D like the others? No, this is actually the CIA. We're going to call the CIA and get the joystick details. But again, just Commodore 64 hardware registries, you can talk this up. You can look this up. If you want to talk to the joystick and get which buttons are pressed, it's just this address. We also need a jump force, like how much vertical force we want to give to our dinosaur when they jump. And let's just make that like 4. Again, we can experiment with these values and just do what feels good later on. Okay. So let's check to see if we're jumping. We have to load the joystick values. So, again, we're just going to that address, and the Commodore 64 does its magic, and the traffic controller or whatever, takes that address, and it's like, oh, you want the joystick, and it sends it over to the joystick. The joystick's plugged into some wires, and it looks at those wires and turns it into binary for 1s and 0s if you're pressing the button or not. Extremely simple hardware. And in fact, we're so obsessed with input delay and polling rate on modern machines. You get to literally, when I put this right here, that is when it gets pulled. We get to literally just ask for the state of the joystick right now. Is the circuit closed? Is it? There is no, if you're making a more complicated game, you probably will set up a polling routine. But it's pretty dang cool. Right in our CPU instruction, we can just talk to the joystick as it is in this moment in time. There's 0 input delay, and that's kind of like the dream, isn't it? Especially for me as a Smash player. Okay, so yeah, in the interest of time, I probably won't explain this too much. I want to get into it a little bit, but I'll probably gloss over it a little bit. The joystick has 5 buttons. There's the fire button, and then there's the 4 directional buttons, up, down, left, and right. The fire button is the one that I have right here, and then these are up, down, left, and right. So Basically, I'm running this through a bitwise and routine. If you are a programmer, then you're going to know how this works. But what I'm basically saying is we don't care about these 4 directional numbers. We only care about the fire button. And if the fire button is open or it's a 1, then it's not being pressed, and we don't care about this routine. We're not going to make our dinosaur jump. If you are pressing the fire button, the circuit is closed and it's a 0. That means we want to jump. So I'm going to do, again, branch if not equal. I did something pretty similar up there, and then we're going to end our routine. So when I say branch if not equal, that's actually checking 0. So basically I'm saying if it's a 1, then we don't care and we're ending. If it's a 0, the fire button is pressed. Again, the circuit is closed. And we're going to keep going, and we want to make our dinosaur jump. And again, all we have to do is take that jump force and give it to the velocity. And then we already have the physics written, so yeah, we're going to take our jump force. Oh, and it's negative because in retro computer land and retro game land, higher numbers are actually downwards and lower numbers are upwards. So we want to set an upwards force, so it's negative. So we're going to set that to velocity. And then we probably want to clear out the fractional velocity, the subpixel velocity, just to be safe here. Now, Super Mario Brothers doesn't do this, for instance. A lot of old games don't clear out the subpixels just because they're trying to save those extra CPU cycles. So you can get away with it. But anyway, let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so we have our gravity and we get clamped. Now I'm going to try hitting the fire button and see what happens. Oh, look at that, nothing's happening. I must have done something wrong here. That's right. I forgot to, this routine is not being called by anything. It's just sitting here and nothing cares about it. So we have to go back up to, again, this is our main loop that runs every frame. We have to actually run that routine. Otherwise it just sits around and does nothing. But now we're running it. Let's try now. Oh, there it goes. Okay, but we have a problem. If I just hold down the fire, then every time it runs check jump, well, it says, oh, the fire button's pressed, so we're just going to make it keep jumping and jumping and jumping. We have to do something about that. We only want it to jump if he's on the ground, right? If he's in the air, we don't want it to, multiple jumps or anything. There's other techniques like determining if it's being held down or if it's just being pressed. That's a little bit more complicated. Right now, we're just going to check and see if it's in the air. So that means we need a new mailbox because we need a special number that tells us is he in the air or is he on the ground. So we're going to set up a new mailbox here, new memory address in there. And we're going to go down here and we have to make sure that we set that to 0. Okay, so now we are going to go back down to our check jump routine. So again, we already have this here. We're checking the joystick, and if the fire button's not pressed, we're just leaving. All we have to do is, again, the same thing. If he's in the air, then we also don't want to do anything and just leave. So all we have to do is add that condition. So we look at in air, and if it's 0, let's say if it's 0, then he's on the ground. If it's 1, he's in the air. So if it's 0, we just do this. Branch if equal, if it's equal to 0, then we go down here. And that's pretty much it. The last thing is that, when we press the fire button and he jumps, we have to make sure we're setting that in air to keep track of him being in air. So we're going to increment that to 1. So when you press the fire button and he jumps, now he's in the air. Last thing we have to do is when he hits the ground, he's no longer in the air, so we have to set it back to 0. So here's the clamp routine. Here's our section for we've gone through the floor. And we're already loading 0 up here, so we're just going to store that to in air as well. And that should solve our problem. And also, he was very floaty. He was like jumping really high. So let's increase our gravity a little bit, like maybe 55 or whatever. I just have that in my notes. Oh, now he's falling a lot faster. And now when we jump, oh, look at that. He's not jumping again. What did I do wrong? Let's see. I didn't change that much, did I? This is what I did wrong. There we go. I was saying if in air is equal to 0, then we're leaving. That means if he's on the ground, then he can't jump. That makes no sense. Now it's going to be if he's in the air, he can't jump. There we go. Now he's jumping. Awesome. Let's see. I'm going to go for just a little bit longer. Again, I want to leave a few minutes for questions at the end, but I can't. So I don't think I can get to everything here. But let's at least see if we can draw an obstacle on the screen, right? We need those cactuses to jump over. So let's try to do that. This is pretty much stuff that we've done before already. So we just need to set up another sprite. Again, our friend Vic has these magical addresses. Like these first two are the coordinates for sprite 1. These are the coordinates for sprite 2. And then we have to just enable our sprites here. Just everywhere that like controls the player sprite, we're just gonna, again, I have, if we go back to our graphics, down here, I have an obstacle sprite. It's just, again, another grid of zeros and ones to draw our cactus, and we're gonna store that in, again, just like giving new values to our friend Vic. Let's do something better than the Chrome Dinosaur game. Let's make the cactus green. Cactuses are supposed to be green. So let's do that. And we just have to set the starting position as well. So let's see. We want to start on the ground, which is like our max position, and then throw that there, and then let's start the X position at 0, and then we're just gonna like make it move left across the screen. So the starting X position doesn't matter all that much. So we need physics for this obstacle, and we have to move left across the screen. We kind of did that at the beginning. I was incrementing the sprite position for the dinosaur, and it was just going down. We can pretty much do the same thing for the obstacle. I'm not even going to make another complicated routine here. I'm just going to move obstacle, and then we're going to decrement the X position like 3 times, so that it moves 3 pixels every frame. Let's run that. And, oh.
You can save it.
You have to enable the sprite.
I forgot to enable the sprite. So, here we go, enable sprite. So I'm only enabling sprite number 1. I also have to enable sprite number 2 right there. That should do it. Oh no! I have to divide by 64. Again, a quirk of the Commodore 64. Hey, there it is. There's our cactus. And now we can jump over there. And you'll notice like when it reaches the left side of the screen, it sort of like teleports to the middle of the screen. That's actually because the width of the screen is 320 pixels. And again, it's 8 bits, so it's only going to pixel 255. Again, our friend Vic has a way of saying, oh, it's past pixel 255. There's like another special bit that you set if you need to draw past that. It's a little bit complicated, and I won't be doing it today. But the NES, for instance, the width of that screen is 256 pixels, so you actually don't have to deal with that on NES. And speaking of which, NES has the same CPU as the Commodore 64, or the same type of CPU. It's the 6502. So the code that you're looking at right now that I've explained to you, if you're interested in NES, this is already your introduction to NES as well. It's just the hardware registers, and our friend Vic is Commodore 64 specific, but you might actually be able to take some of this, and if you look up some NES source code or a disassembly or whatever, you might actually be able to start understanding some of this. Yeah, but it looks like, so the last thing I didn't get to was collision detection, which is actually kind of fun. You might think, oh, you have to look at the position of the dinosaur and the position of the cactus, and then draw like a rectangular hitbox around them and compare the coordinates. That is not true. Something amazing about these old systems is, again, Our friend Vic can do collision detection. It actually looks and sees if sprites are overlapping. It is pixel perfect, so it takes that transparency into account. And all you have to do is ask Vic, hey, is this sprite overlapping something? And then Vic says yes, and then you know you collided with something and you can do like a game over or whatever. It's incredibly simple. Even though I didn't get to it today, you can just take my word for it that it's very, very easy, only a few lines of code. But yeah, I think that is pretty much where we can leave off today. We have the start of our Google Chrome Dinosaur game, and it's kind of functional and can maybe hold your attention for a few seconds. And you saw, again, even if you didn't understand it, absolutely everything, just how fast and easy and how few lines of code this takes. We have a few basic routines, checking for the jump, the physics, the clapping when you hit the ground, and then just writing the sprites. It's not black magic. Like I said, it's gray magic at worst. I think this is really accessible, especially with how fast you can write the code and then test it immediately. This is something that people 30 years ago only would have dreamed of, and it's just so amazing that we get to do it now. And I hope in seeing this, you feel a little bit less intimidated and a little bit inspired to look into it yourself. So that's pretty much what I have. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. And feel free to line up. There's a couple of mics on either side. If you have questions, feel free to come up, and I'll try to answer your questions as well. So yeah, thank you, everybody. And while we're doing that, I just also want to give a couple more quick shout-outs. Even if you don't code, I found some amazing software. This is GB Studio for Game Boy and Game Boy Color. This is actually, it's supposed to allow you to, even if you have little to no coding experience, it basically gives you a piece of software that lets you, it's like a game maker for Game Boy. It lets you create real Game Boy games with very little knowledge of coding. It was really, really cool. I haven't tried it out myself, but I just wanted to give this a shout out. There's some amazing tools out there, so that if you don't, if you decided for some reason you don't like assembly, you actually get to not use it for some systems as well. Yeah, okay, it looks like we have, let's start on this side and then go to that side.
Sure, quick question. How can you be sure the loop runs once every 60th of a second?
That is a really good question. So these old systems, they have an interrupt system for the most part. I think maybe Atari 2600 doesn't, maybe Apple II doesn't, but I could be wrong there, by the way. But basically, but somewhere on the board, you can actually tell it to, every time it's done drawing the screen, it reaches the bottom of the screen, it reaches what's called a vertical blank period. It actually sends an interrupt signal to the CPU. That basically lets you run your routine just every time that happens. And so you don't have to manually set up a timer or anything like that. You can even set up your own manual timers to do that. But yeah, again, if you go to our little start here, let's see, here it is, set vertical blank interrupt. So I talk to these magical addresses on the Commodore 64, and I just tell it to, every time the screen reaches the bottom, it runs the vertical blank routine. And here's the vertical blank routine, and you can see in that routine, we're running the main loop, and it just runs every frame. Okay, let's go on this side.
So emulators are a really easy way to get access to these consoles. If you actually wanted to run it on the physical consoles, how would you go about doing that?
Oh man, there are so many great ways depending on the system. Commodore 64 has hardware, a popular one is called SD to IEC. You plug it in and you just put in an SD card, and the system thinks it's like a floppy drive, and you just get to load stuff off your SD card. NES, Super Nintendo, they have flash cartridges. There are so many amazing ways to run homebrew software on these consoles. And even the most amazing ones, they do Kickstarters where they actually manufacture cartridges that you can buy as well. Some of my favorite modern retro games have done that as well. Thank you for the great question. It's really exciting.
Super quick question. So the best motivator for anyone to do this kind of work is potentially is it fun, but also, is there money at the end of it? Is it possible to commercialize, I made an old game for an old system, even though there's some gray area perhaps about that?
Absolutely. Here is Sam's Journey for Commodore 64, a commercial game that is on sale right now. And look at how amazing this game looks. It looks like a modern indie game. And it's on the same system that I was just coding for. Forget about Minecraft and this is the real deal. And you can buy this. This is one amazing example. Here's another amazing example, Micro Mages for the NES. This had a Kickstarter campaign. You can get this on Steam as well. You can release these games on Steam, just wrapped in an emulator, and you can play it on modern systems as well. But you also have the advantage of having the NES ROM, and for the extra enthusiasts, they can play it on the real console. there is definitely money in this. These games look incredible. These are made by successful companies, and you can totally be a part of that as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it was possible to sell like an emulator bundled with. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We probably have time for one more, right? On this side over here.
Both of you guys have already asked my questions already. Could you tell me a little bit about the game that you were working on there?
Yeah, the game is, I can't go into it too much because we're out of time. The game is called Magicore Anomala. It is a game for Amiga, which came out in 1985, and it's sort of like a bullet hell, but with platformer / Mega Man mechanics. It was inspired by I Want to Be the Guy fan games. I'm a big part of or a marginal part of the fan game community as well. This game is going to be a few years out. It's not going to be ready for a while. I'm just working on it in my spare time, but I really love Amiga, and it's been a great journey working on this game. And I hope you would be excited to follow the development as well as I post updates on my own social media. I think that's going to be it for me. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you had a good time. And I'm going to share some of the passion for this incredible hobby with you, and I can't wait to see what you create as well.